So do I have any comments or changes on the minutes for March 29th?
28th.
Okay.
Brett or Nancy, do one of you want a motion to approve the minutes for March 28th?
I move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Nancy. Second? I think Brett's seconding.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes. Those in favor, just raise your right hand. All right, so we'll move right on to the actual meeting. And the next order of business is public forum. And do we have anybody set up for to speak on something that isn't on the agenda?
I did not receive any speaker requests. We received written comments and those were forwarded to committee members before the meeting. We do have one speaker for the action item.
All right, and so there's additions and deletions to the agenda. Do we have any of those?
Not that I know of.
Hearing none, this is unfinished business, Oak Knoll Golf Course drought impacts and recommendations.
All right, well, I will start off with this. This is a follow-up agenda item from the last meeting. I presented some information on the drought impacts, and some things have changed, and I'll go over those things. I'll just do it right now. The outlook has actually gotten better. I mean, we've received more rain than I think we were anticipating. Things are starting to look good. There's been a couple of fortunate or planned things that have happened that have helped us a little bit. Fortunate side is the rain. We decided to go ahead and fill to charge all of the irrigation lines from the pond, which drew down the pond drew it down about a third, and stormwater filled the pond back up. So we actually gained some water reserves, which is a really good thing. As far as I know, we haven't had to start watering anything yet, which keeps that water in reserves, which is a good thing. And I'm not over there today, but I think it might be raining today over there, or could have rained. Yes, I'm getting thumbs up. So we're feeling optimistic about the weather as we're experiencing it now. Now, obviously, we don't have a pond big enough to save up all this water, and there is actually a pond up the street that's not filling up very, very much, that we get our TID water from. But I think we're probably past the point where we think we're not going to get any water, and it looks like there's a good chance that we're going to get at least 20 days of TID this year. So those things have come into light since the last time we talked, which is great. I'm really excited about that. And it just goes along with our goal, which we've stated in this memo, especially to keep the course open as long as possible. But I just have to, preface that, we're dealing with this all over the West. And I saw an article in the LA Times this morning that there was a big press conference down there in Los Angeles. And what they stated to the citizens of LA is LA can't afford to have green grass this year. And I think that's going, obviously it's going around everywhere. And unfortunately, if we can't water our front lawns, it's not that big of a deal. But if we can't water the golf course, it does impact business and our revenues and things like that. So let's start talking about the options, and then we can have a discussion. And then today, what we'd like to do is get to the point where you feel comfortable making a recommendation. If at any point in time I'm talking and this noise in the background gets too loud, just kind of put your hand up and I'll go on mute, and Rachel will take over and pick up where I left off. I won't leave the meeting. I'll come back on later. So I apologize for that, but it's unavoidable. So Let's get to the memo that we sent out. So we looked into the factors. Oh, the other thing I was going to mention is no decision is being made here today. I just want to be really clear about that. This is an advisory committee to the Parks Commissioners. The Parks Commissioners have control and management of funds and of properties that are under them as elected officials, and they will make the decision of whether or not the golf course, whatever happens to the golf course, the commissioners will make that decision, and we're all making recommendations to them. And I hope that our recommendation is in line where I can make the same recommendation that the committee's making. But in the end, the Parks Commissioners will be the ones who make the decision. So let's talk about this. So
Michael, do you want me to pull up the memo and share the screen?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll just help us go through it, I guess. So I'm going to just go ahead and start talking about it, though. The first option that we talked about was using effluent from the wastewater treatment plant. And, you know, I've lived in places where this has happened. Generally, the infrastructure is already there, or there's some circumstance where infrastructure is available where they can use that to get the effluent over to the golf course. That's not the case in our situation. Plus, we did check in with the Public Works Department, and they are already on the hook for putting effluent back into Bear Creek. And that's for fish habitat, you know, keeping things going on Bear Creek. Now, and they're in a multi-million-dollar project for restoration of Bear Creek in line with that whole effluent being discharged into the creek. It's not impossible to use effluent to water any surface. It certainly is possible. We looked at it a little bit further at our Ashland Pond area, which is right next to the wastewater treatment plant. And actually the effluent goes right through the property in a pipe and then goes out into Bear Creek at the property as well. And that's the Ashland Pond property. We looked at preliminary, just looked into this for that property, and Public Works Department had informed us that they had also looked into that on some of their properties. And there is a possibility that at some point in the future that will be a reality, but the permitting process is daunting and could take several years for that to take place. And then the infrastructure costs are also, I think, they exclude Oak Knoll Golf Course from that option unless we had tens of millions of dollars to spend on infrastructure to get that over there. Brett? I can't hear you, Brett. Okay, work on that, and as soon as you get that fixed, we'll take your question. If you can't get it fixed, just type it in and we'll try to answer it. Okay, so that is not an option right now to help with Oak Knoll Golf Course in this biennium or even in the next two biennia. We will continue to look at that as an option going forward. Effluent is always going to be there, but if it's already tied up with requirements from DEQ to go back into Bear Creek, then we do have to go through a process to change that. Okay, so drilling a well is another option, and we put in the memo that we don't support this option, just mainly because the process to drill a well is not something that you can just do. You can't go down to the planning department and ask to drill a well and then just drill it. We're within the urban growth boundary of the city of Ashland, and there are special requirements for that. Especially when we're using that water to water Oak Knoll Golf Course. Again, it's not something that couldn't be possible at some point in time, but using it to solve the problem that we have right now, or even for the near future and even 5 years out, without having the resources to put towards the process to actually get a well, which could be very daunting in and of itself. We don't believe that that's a viable option for right now, or that it would actually even benefit Oaknote Golf Course in the short term. Brett?
Yeah, I think just back to the effluent discussion. What about the possibility of putting any of that in a pinch, putting any of that into a water truck and driving it out to the course? I know Tom Windmill has a water truck, and there was some discussion early on about somehow using some of that, filling it and bring it out to water greens and stuff like that.
Yeah, we haven't looked into that specifically, but we will. It's an option as long as it makes sense and the water is available. The way it was brought to me before was, what if we got a water truck and went over to Medford Water Commission and bought water that way? And that didn't seem feasible because of possible curtailment plus the cost of transportation, and we'd still be paying for the water, although it's not that expensive. But I'd be more than happy to look into the effluent, and if they have excess that isn't going back, that could potentially be used for this purpose, and what the transfer cost would be, and what I'd like to know also what would one truck be one green, or is one truck many greens, or how much of the pond will it fill up, that kind of stuff. So I'll look into that for you, and I'll probably won't be, obviously I can't address it right now, but I'd be able to address it in the Parks Commission meeting that's coming up, which is just a study session, which they won't make a decision in that meeting either. But if you can come to that meeting, we can talk about it in that meeting.
Just as long as I'm not out of town.
Okay. Well, or just it may just be paying attention, and if you feel like it was answered to your satisfaction or not, let me know. So, but yeah, we'll look into that. So let's go down to raised funds. So one-time user raised funds would be something that would be possible and could help out for budgeting. We would have to have those funds in advance before we spent them. We can't spend money that could potentially be raised in the future. We would have to do a budget adjustment, and the funds would actually have to be there in the form of a grant before we could actually bank on them. All of this is with the understanding that there's even water available. It's not just TID that's the problem. Ashland might have a problem making water as well. And, TID, some of the water that we drink in Ashland and use as culinary water in Ashland comes from TID. Ashland uses TID to supplement their water at certain times during the year, and they just take the water and clean it like they do the water coming into the reservoir. So without that water coming in, they're already kind of down a little bit, and they may have to look at getting money or water from Medford, which again costs money and everything, which there could be a curtailment. And that's kind of what I'm getting to is, if we have money to pay for it, that's great. But what if the money's not available? So I don't want to discourage people from raising funds. And we will take them if you do raise them. But I just want to be clear that, sorry, is that too loud? Okay, I just want to be clear that just because the money's available doesn't mean the water is going to be available. Just so down the road, we don't get in a situation where it looks like we took money, or we say we're going to take money and guarantee that there's going to be water, because we just can't do that. So that's an option to look at. The other thing is one-time funds from APRC, which it's just not feasible. I apologize to everybody listening, but we're not just in a drought of water, we're in a drought of funding as well. And we're working on making cuts to our budget that equal up to $550,000, which is 10% of our budget. We really hope we don't have to do the full 10%, but we're going through a process right now of cutting, of identifying where we would cut up to 10% of our budget. And it's going to have a severe impact on every part of APRC. So taking money from another area to put towards golf, it doesn't seem feasible at this point. That doesn't mean that it's impossible. It just means, from my perspective, I don't feel comfortable recommending to the commissioners that we unsubsidize another program to further subsidize or if you don't want to use subsidize, that's fine. With that, we take away general fund dollars from one program, which would be detrimental to that program, to put towards Oakville Golf Course. I don't feel comfortable making that recommendation, but the commissioners can take comments. And if that's something people want to state, that they feel like the golf course should be prioritized over other programs, then you have the opportunity to do that. I'm just giving you my point of view. The next, go ahead, Brett.
So I just some preliminary work I did coming to this, there is ways to take funds that are within the overall budget and reallocate them. I'd have to go to the budget committee to do that, I believe. But I mean, I guess at this point in time, to me, it's like, okay, what are we spending money on? Are we buying new pickup trucks? Are we doing this or that, the other thing? Some of the other things that certainly could be put off, I don't know, because I have never seen the actual budget, but I'm an accountant. I certainly would take a look through them and see what I could find. I mean, not that I'm an expert, but I've been doing accounting for almost 40 years. So,
yeah. So Brett, I get where you're coming from. And I can assure you that those things are already happening to make up for the losses we're having in other areas. For instance, consultants are being cut, vehicle purchases are being cut, furloughs are happening, layoffs are probably happening. All of those things are happening. We have been cutting from our materials and services for several years. And we're at a point now where, nobody's been able to go to training or anything like that for several years. It hasn't just been in the last year or just something that's going forward. So there already are a lot of those cuts going on. But your point is correct. The commissioners can reallocate money. And that's what I was trying to say was, I'm not going to recommend that. But if there are people who would like to talk to the commissioners to see if you can convince them that reallocation would be appropriate based on prioritization of the golf course over other programs or other things, you're more than welcome to do that, and that is a possibility that could happen. So you're right, Brett. Go ahead.
Well, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I guess just as a background, how did we end up in a budget shortfall? You said $550,000.
Well, Rick, do you want to answer this? Because I just
yes, I will. The latest thing, which is what I think, excuse me, Michael is talking about today, is that we have a budget approved. We were living within our budget, and in the past, a few weeks ago, the city manager requested that APRC and all city departments give them a list of cuts. And it was for a 5% cut for all departments, and for most departments, also give them a scenario for 10% cuts. But this, you have to understand that this is on top of, in the last biennium, our central service fees, what we pay to the city for central services, human resources, accounting, legal, etc. those fees were doubled. So that was a $500,000 increase in our expenses. So there's multiple, and in addition to that, before, not this biennium, but the biennium before was the first time that, excuse me, that we have not received 209 per thousand of the.
It was the first time we didn't get 209 per thousand. It was cut down to $1.89. So the bottom line here, Rick, you're breaking up really bad. I'm going to try and finish this up. But the bottom line here is we don't decide how much revenue we receive from the general fund. It may say in the charter that we receive a certain amount of the general fund or up to a certain amount of the general fund, but we actually don't get that. The city decides how much money from the general fund we are allocated every year, and that has consistently been going down. The other part of that is, like Rick had mentioned, expenses that we have no control over have gone up. Central service fees that are dictated to us by the city of Ashland for HR, admin, things like that have doubled, like Rick said, which is an increase of about $500,000 a year. We pay about $1 million a year to the city for central services. And that's IT as well and things like that. Parks also is the only part of the city of Ashland that pays additional money to the police department for to fund a portion of one of their officers. And there's lots of other things as well. So we don't have control over some of those things. We don't have control over the revenue, and there are some expenses that we don't have control over. So over time, those things have kind of eaten away at our budget. Now, I want to be fair in saying that the recent budget cuts of 5 and 10% are across the board, or should be across the board, and they're not just to Ashland Parks and Recreation. They're also to police, fire, planning, parts of public works, admin, stuff like that. So, but over time, the funds, the revenue has just gone down and down, and expenses have gone up and up. So, does that answer your question? I mean, it's not exhaustive, but that's generally the gist of it. So, and then one other thing, just really quick. When I started working here in 2014, there were 44.75 full-time employees or full-time equivalents. And we are at, Sean or Tara, are we at 34 now? 34.75?
34.75.
So over the 8 years, we've seen our budget decrease enough that we have gone from 44 full-time employees to 34 full-time employees. So, let's see. So the one-time funds, we went over that. The commissioners could reallocate money. It is possible. It's not recommended from me, but you could lobby the commissioners to do that. Redesigning the golf course. Now, this is if the golf course has to close, and I just want to throw a caveat in here right now. We don't know that the golf course we do not know that the golf course has to close. What we know is we cannot afford to water the golf course with city water. That's what we know. Okay. We also know that we're having some staffing issues, but we think we can work those things out. If things fall into place and we are able to stretch the water that we're given through TID and rain and things like that, to keep us open, I'm sorry. to keep us open, we will. And, you know, one of the best pieces of news that I've received recently is that, and this isn't even for sure, but that TID could potentially stagger the water delivery to all of its users. And if that's the case, that is way better for us, because we don't have a big enough pond to save water for the entire year or even for 2 months. But if we got it like in 5-day increments, then we could survive 5 days without water, you know, and bridge those gaps. So that could potentially push us out even farther. And we're getting really close to fall at that point. So I just want to say that we don't know for sure that the golf course needs to close, or all we know for sure is we cannot afford to water the golf course with city water. And we also know that there could be a potential that there may not be any city water to water the golf course, and that there could be other water shortages as well. So those are the things we know. Nancy?
I just want to say that I think that redefining or looking at ways to create a golf course that doesn't require the amount of water that it does, it absolutely has to be part of going forward from here. You can't, nobody wants to do this every year. And, you know, figure out how to get rid of people or how to scratch out 2 more inches of water or whatever it is, that the course, because of the way the climate's going and everything else, has to be something different. And so I know that's not on the agenda today, but I think it has to be part of the agenda going forward from today, no matter what happens this summer, if we're going to have a golf course at all.
Well, I agree with that, Brett. Let me just answer that really quick. So I do think that's on the agenda today, Nancy. I think redesigning for a 9-hole golf course could include that, because what we're looking at is, it says right here, a redesign of the golf course to be drought tolerant. So that is a possibility. Absolutely. It would take CIP money, capital improvement money. And if people were going to raise money for something, that's what I would say they raise money for. Let's raise money for something that's going to make a difference long term, not just to turn the water on for a few days or a few months. We need to make a long-term change in order to ensure that the next time we have these issues, it could be next year, or it could be 5 years from now, we don't know. We are more resilient and we can get through them. So, Brett?
I would agree with you, and I think many of the things that have come out, you know, from the United States Golf Association, that we as a country are way too used to having these lush green fairways, and playability as far as like even going to Bandon Dunes and places like that. You know, you're playing on something that doesn't have lush green fairways a lot, because it's the way the course is designed, and frankly, it, you know, don't hit the ball a long ways when it's not lush and green. You get a lot more roll. It can make the game even more enjoyable. So I think that it's definitely something that we should have. I mean, even, you know, I know we have sprinklers that water partial parts of the rough. Well, you know, let's quit watering the roughs at all down the road. I mean, obviously that's not a option at this point, because we're not, you know, we wouldn't be planning on watering the fairways and the roughs much at all, but we could certainly cut those back and just, you know, water just the fairway portion some.
Yeah.
Try to get away from the roughs.
Right.
I mean, we have you know, hard pan out there in the summer times anyway, because we don't water the whole entire golf course like a lot of places do. So, I mean, we're kind of used to hitting off of dirt when it's, you know, late in the summers. So.
Right. So good points. CIP, you know, in the long term, CIP changes that would bring about more drought resistant golf course would be necessary. But, you know, that is something that we can look into. And then, Brett, your point of just looking at how the water's, what our rotation is right now, and making sure we're using water the most efficiently today is important. So thanks for those comments. So redesigning for a 9-hole golf course, that's something that if the Parks Commissioners wanted to put some money from CIP, we could do that quicker. But that is something that, a lot of times we can accomplish over time if we can get through this season. That's something we can do as we move along as well. Another option, now these are, if we are not doing what we're doing now, the one I just talked about, redesigning is something I guess we could continue to do even without closing. But the next one is if for some reason we had to close, and I just want to talk about what would make us close really quick. And it's in the motion actually, but what would make us close is that we get to a point where our playership drops off to a point that the golf course is no longer sustainable because revenues are not coming in. And the question would be, well, why would it drop off? Well, that would be because obviously the playability, and if people are continually playing the golf course through the summer, because with the conditions that we're able to provide, and I can tell you, we're going to provide the best that we can. It's just not going to be great, but we'll do the best that we can. And if people continue to play, that is a good thing for the golf course, and it could be what keeps us going. So if people don't have an issue with playing on hard pan, can deal with all of the other issues that we're dealing with, and we have at least enough water to just keep the greens going, it looks good. Now, what if we get to a point where it doesn't look good and people are like, we just can't play here and we have no revenue coming in? Then one of the options, if we were to close, would be to redesign for a modified use, which it could be anything at that point. It could be redesigning for like Patrick talked about, a practice course or something else. I don't know for sure, but that's something that we could look into as well. So I don't really have specifics on that, like say, oh, if we redesign for modified use, I can guarantee you that it would be better or worse or whatever. But that's one of the options. So the partial closure, Nancy.
You're muted, Nancy.
So just so you know, I polled the women's golf group, and there's an impression that closure is already a foregone conclusion. And that isn't going to help the perception that I can go down there and play all summer. And, I can't tell you where it comes from, but I think going, ahead, that's not helpful in terms of keeping people coming if they think any minute it's going to be closed. And so whatever happens, I think needs to be, made clear to the people who play golf of what the plans are and when and why would it close or not.
Well, and that's what we're trying to explain. And let me tell you, I'd rather be in a position where people are worried that it's going to close than be in a position where we close it and nobody had any idea that there was even any issue. So that's where we're coming from with this. Now what you can do, people are going to believe whatever they would like. And if they believe it's already a foregone conclusion, then, maybe we can't change their mind and only time will tell what happens. But if you look at the recommendation that we're making today, we're hoping that you will make today, and the one that I will make is that we stay open as long as feasible, with the understanding that if the levels of service fall off enough, that would be the factor that would lead us to closure. And if levels of service fall off so much that we have 25% of the people who using the course that used to, and we're getting 25% of the revenue, then that would be the situation. But we don't want to just close the golf course. It's not our goal to close the golf course. But we have to admit that, things aren't looking good, and I'd rather people be prepared for that. Now, one of the options, if we do have to close, not an option, this is a given. If we do have to close, The driving range and practice greens will stay open. The golf course as a park will stay open as well. And we will have to water some. It's not like if we close the golf course, we all of a sudden don't have to take care of it. We still have to make sure that the neighborhood around there isn't in danger of, there's no fire danger because of the interface between the golf course and the neighborhood, and let blackberries grow and all kinds of fire danger take place out there. So we would still be maintaining it, and it would still be usable for walking, biking, you know, those types of things, going out and hitting balls at the driving range, practicing and stuff like that. It just wouldn't be run as a golf course. But you know, that's I can tell you that is what we can guarantee, is that we will do. I guess I shouldn't guarantee anything, except we're going to try our best to accomplish certain things. So that's our guarantee, is that we're going to try our best to keep the golf course open, but understanding that a lot of these factors are out of our control. And we're going to try our best, if it closes, to keep the driving range and the practice greens open, which is a little more in our control. Rachel?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, just as a reminder, that yes, our golf course manager, Patrick Orapollo, did leave at the end of March. And right now, Haley Fosnot is our interim golf course manager. However, Haley is leaving us in about mid-June. So when she does leave, we are looking at, there she is. We are looking at probably just having at this point to backfill with some temporary employees. And that's kind of where we're at right now. That's kind of all we can promise at this point with a position. Is there any questions about staffing?
Haley, did you want to say something? All right.
Well, I don't want to leave, but I kind of need to. That's the only thing.
Well, we don't want to leave you.
I hate to leave right now with all of it, but
yeah, and
what's right.
You know, let's just talk about that for a second. You know, I think probably part of the perception that there's no hope is because you are seeing people leaving, and Patrick chose to leave, and Haley's leaving because she's got a great new opportunity and things like that. Her family does, but those aren't the indicators that will decide. Those aren't the indicators that will show the. It doesn't show exactly what's going to happen. Those aren't the indicators we're going to use to decide whether or not the golf course stays open. We're talking water and the ability to hire staff. And we think we can hire staff if there's a possibility that we can keep the golf course open. We can get the revenue to pay for staff, because where Haley works on the pro shop is completely supported by revenue from the golf course. Haley?
And I just want to make it clear that myself and all of our staff here have made it very clear to every single person coming in the store that we are doing our best to not close the doors, and that we're trying our best to make sure that everyone knows that we're not closing. We have everything that we possibly can to keep the doors open, and we're trying to make that as well known as possible. Mm-hmm. Every single staff member has been completely up to date with everything going on, and we're here to support and say, we're here supporting the community, and we're here to support Oaknall, and we have no intent to close. We are just up against, there's no water. But
yeah. Well, and I appreciate that, and that's the message we're trying to give, but it won't. I mean, obviously some people will think that it's going to happen and won't believe otherwise unless it doesn't and the time passes. But I think I've probably talked enough. There was a question about revenue last time. We have some information here about revenue. Revenue is good when the golf course is open. And like I said, that revenue pretty much pays for the golf course operations, the business operations. and a lot of the supplies, but it doesn't pay for the maintenance operations. It pretty much pays for the clubhouse. So if we're not getting that revenue in, you can see how it's hard for us to run the business side of it. So I'm just going to go ahead and just kind of go over my motion, or our motion that we think would be appropriate. But this is the committee's motion. You decide what you want to do, but this is pretty much what I think I'll be recommending to the Parks Commissioners as the Parks and Recreation Director. And that's to recommend that the golf course remain operational, or in other words, stay open and operational. Rachel, do you want to continue that?
Sorry. So until such time that available water, staffing, or financial resources are not sufficient to maintain the course to the minimal acceptable level for most golf course participants. And if closed, an evaluation of the property will be undertaken to determine the potential long-term use of the property, which would include golf as an option. And that would be what we talked about, or what Director Black talked about earlier, which is the potential for a redesign for a 9-hole golf course, or a redesign for modified use. And I think we can open it up for discussion, but I do know that we also have public comment as well during this time.
But out of the CIP funds that I did see where it talks about, some of that comes from the food and beverage taxes, which of course are down because of the lack of tourists coming to Ashland because of COVID. Is that where that CIP money could come from if it was if let's say there was more revenue coming in?
Yeah, so CIP, most of the revenue does come from food and beverage, and it's been a great source of funding, and we pay for a lot of big projects with that money. It's not the only source, though. We do get a lot of grants as well, and we can also get loans, things like that, bonds, those types of things, and donations.
Do we have somebody that is a grant writer, for example, that goes after grants? Because I do know that there are a lot of grants that go untapped.
We don't have a grant writer. All of our managers at one point in time are grant writers. We do get a lot of grants. We've received, just in the last couple of years, over $2 million in grants. Or we've received $1.5 million, and we've been approved for another $500,000. So, we do get grants, we do apply for grants, and we do receive grants as well. Now, I'm working with the Mountain Bike Association, or we've talked about working together on applying for grants, because sometimes you can't, if it ever gets too bad, just put your hand up and I'll just go off. But a lot of times, even a 501c3 nonprofit can't apply for certain grants. It has to be through an organization like a city. And in those situations, we work together, and we both do work where the grant writing might come from the nonprofit, and we provide letters of support and things like that, and the money flows through Ashland Parks and Recreation to its intended participant, or intended recipient. And that's something that the groups could work together with us on applying for grants, because as far as I know, and Brett, probably more appropriate to answer your question more appropriately, although we do receive grants in many places over APRC, I don't remember the last time we received or even applied for a grant for the golf course.
I just wonder if there's money through like USGA or any other, got to be a ton of different golf association kind of things.
Yeah, so we should, and that's kind of that one-time money, and we should add that to the list of the one-time money. And we're more than willing to work together. But with our staffing shortages, we do rely on our partners to help us with these grant applications. So if that's something the Men's and Women's Club is interested in looking at with us, we'd be more than happy to sit down with you and start trying to identify some grants. They usually do take a little bit of time to get, though. It might be the CIP we're looking for, not the operations, you know. So if that's the,
a long-term solution to the.
Sure. Yeah, we'd be happy to work with you on that.
I'd definitely be willing to look into it with you guys.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brett. So we do have, Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, we do have someone to speak in public forum. Is that correct?
John Mauer signed up. Is he?
He should be right here with Nancy. Yeah. So, yep. John, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you. Well, a month makes a big difference. The course is in beautiful shape. It's playing well. We'll probably get through this year. I'd like to be optimistic. I'm just going to say we probably will. I want to readdress the issue because we are talking about water. I think the concept or the fact that the well, drilling a well has been dismissed out of hand, more or less. The fact that there isn't staff available to seek permission for a well permit and the impact on nearby streams. Those two factors are what were thrown out as the reason we're not pursuing a well. And I really challenge that. It's almost disingenuous in some ways. Stream impact is not an issue. The difference between groundwater and surface water, they're two different animals altogether. So I'm prefacing all of this by having spent some time talking to the state water master here this week. I've talked to TID, I've talked to our Steve Walker here, water supervisor for the city. And Jim Lewis, I'm going to throw it out to you because you know the historical perspective of this 70 acres that the golf course sits on. This is the termination of the drainage of Tolman Creek. This has supported incredible artesian wells all around the golf course. The entire Croman operation, okay, operated on an artesian well of enormous volumes. The YMCA right now uses no city water. It refills its pools, it takes care of its land on an artesian well, same drainage. The folks of the old Provost Ranch, okay, they're sitting on not only the Clayton Creek drainage, but they're also on artesian wells just on the other side of the road from us. There's enormous amount of water right in our own backyard. The fact that the governor 2 weeks ago, all right, issued the proclamation of a drought that allows right now, you can drill a well for agricultural purposes, okay? Big term, this has been fought, as you know, or you probably have heard, with all the amount of water being sucked out of our aquifers for marijuana and hemp grows. That's been very stingy in allowing agricultural permits. But right now is an exception. We could have one, next week, given this exception. So there's an exception right now. If we just drew a well and just as for domestic use, it allows us at least a half acre of water usage. That would be enough, okay, to give the water for our greens. To not pursue it is, I just don't see the reason. Yes, honestly speaking, we'd have to have a well driller as our first cousin to get them out there on the golf course. They're so backlogged drilling wells for everybody else, you probably couldn't do it. But for God's sakes, it ought to be in our long-term plans. Next week, 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, the well isn't going to be the solution, but to out of hand throw a well as not a solution long-term to the survival of the golf course is just frankly short-sighted. Parks and Rec have wells. We know that. I mean, that's North Mountain Park, Lithia Park. It isn't as though wells are foreign to the, to Parks and Rec. It shouldn't be.
We don't have wells.
No wells.
Okay. Just saying, I've got some other information, but if you say there's not, then I'm barking up the wrong tree. But to out of hand say that we don't drill a well is dancing around an issue here. Water's the issue. We've got it right underneath us, and why not tap into it? That's really all I really can say at this point in time, but it ought to be part of our long-term planning, as is everything else we've talked about today. Either we're going to make it with the rain that just came down in the last 3 weeks and the fact that Immigrant Lake is up today to 18%. So TID is going to give us a little more water than we thought, and it'll probably get us through. So short term, yeah, we're going to probably survive, but if you're not considering a well long-term, then yeah, it ought to go to affordable housing or whatever else plans are going to use it for. But thanks for listening. That's just my little input.
So since this is a committee meeting, we can talk a little bit. And we don't intend to get into a discussion, but I just want to say a couple of things. The Lithia Park, the water comes from TID for the upper pond, and then is drained from there to water the upper park, and the lower park is from city water. North Mountain Park is water from the Bear Creek. There is a pump. You can stand at the bridge on North Mountain and look down. There is a pump down there, and we pump water out of Bear Creek until there is no water in Bear Creek, or we're told we can't do it anymore, and then it's watered with culinary water. Those two parks happen to be the highest priority parks in our park system. Anyways, a well is definitely something to look into for long term. We can say that. But like I stated earlier, I do not believe that it would do us what we're looking for this season. But as a long-term opportunity, I agree, it's still out there. Jim?
Do we have anybody else who would like to speak?
We do have one other person who I'll bring in right now, Jim Hatton. Jim, you can turn your mic and camera on if you like. You'll have to turn on your mic.
Okay, we're good. Okay, so I'd like to work backwards. I'd like to suggest a possible motion. Remove the word staffing. This is about drought, not about staffing, and to use staffing as an excuse to close the golf course is not what this issue is, and it does not belong in there. And as far as financial resources, that should be modified by saying as associated with the increased costs of water. I would also like you to remove that last and if closed evaluation, because we've been talking about closed, and there's two ways to think about closed. Closed for this season and closed forever, and you've been conflating that as you've been discussing it all this time. As you can see from the golf course, it came back pretty darn good from 2 years ago drought. Okay, could have come out better, as I said last time, if it had been managed a little better. And so even closing the golf course, maintaining it for fires, as Michael Black has suggested, of course. Okay, so you still have to mow a bit. That doesn't belong in there. Okay, if you are going to, by the way, talk about budget to the full committee, you should be presenting not only the costs of the golf course, but the costs, staffing costs, and if that's what you're going to put in there, and water costs for the entire segments of the park's responsibilities. What are you doing on the ball fields in terms of water? What are your plans there? Okay, you can't treat this as just one entity. It has to be comparison with everything else. Let's see what other things. We never did estimate how much water we needed for the greens, as I suggested in my last suggestion. So you actually know the amounts that you are dealing with and the possible costs that you're dealing with. Let's see, what else did I write down up here? Yeah, so let's see, maybe. I don't know what the first sentence meant with the flexibility and target watering. That looked like you were going to say you wouldn't just focus on the greens. That was in the first paragraph. Just looking at the things that I looked at as I went through here. You're still trimming trees out there rather than making the golf course better for people. The greens are the only greens that aren't green in the valley right now. The weeds are coming back. There's that little weed coming back on the practice green and on the regular greens. It looks to me like you've given up on the course right now, anticipating some kind of closure. And I agree with Nancy. It really aggravates me to have strangers come up who, once they know I'm a golfer, say, is it really closing? Are they not really? It's like, it's closing, is it? And I have to explain, well, we're looking at that. That's somehow that rumor got out, and it's a shame because it makes us look bad. It makes us, at the very least, indecisive. And I guess I had a few other things, but I think that's enough right there. More data for better decisions, as always. Thank you.
So I just want to clarify something. This is the golf course subcommittee. This is not the Parks Commission. The Parks Commission is looking at the full water issue. If you'd like to attend the Parks Commission meeting on Wednesday, they're planning on discussing the entire water situation for the entire system. The golf course water is paid out of a different budget than the rest of the parks is paid out of. The golf course does have its own budget for water. The rest of the park system has a different budget for water. So Jim, do you want to?
Yeah, a lot of great input, a lot of interesting discussion. To me, we have a short-term issue and we have a long-term issue. John Maurer obviously has done some research, and I think the well is something that should be moved to the top and at least discussed, and costs. And then Jim had a good point about how much water would it take just to keep the basic minimal going, the greens, the practice, just that. How much are we going to need? And I wish I was as optimistic as John is that we're going to keep it open for the whole season. But you know, there's the smoke issues, and there's so many things. You know, the golf course did well during the pandemic. Once we could open it back up again, people felt comfortable out there, and it's a good social experience, as we all know. And so there's a lot of benefits that we get from the golf course that I think get lost in the community. I've had numerous people tell me, why don't we have affordable housing out there? And I tell them, well, you go talk to your developer buddies and see how much, if anybody's even interested in that. I don't think there's any interest in 60, 70 acres of affordable housing, but I see a lot of interest in a wonderful 70-acre park-like golf course that has so many positives to the community, not just golf, because we've been trying to do weddings. We encourage people to walk. We encourage the foot golf thing for whatever value that is. And so we've tried to expand the use of this facility. And I have been a proponent of the golf course for the 20 plus years I've been on the commission. And I can't tell you how many people have said this is an elitist sport. Who even goes there? And I try to say, no, you have to look at it as an amenity for a community that we have put forward for almost 100 years. And so my hope is the short term, we can get through this season. If it's a triage, we got to keep the greens going, and it's an investment. We don't want to lose. And so we try to keep this, if it's really bad and the water's cut off and there's smoke, we still got to keep this thing, eke this thing out. And that's what I would be recommending to the full commission. But hey, the full commission's got a lot of priorities to come up with, because this TID sensitive properties, we have to decide what's the most valuable to the whole community. Obviously, this is the golf subcommittee, and so it's a little golf centric, and I totally understand that, and it's really valuable to have people who really care about an amenity that the city has, and despite all this conspiracy talk about we're closing the golf course, I think we're going to try to make a huge effort to just eke this thing out for this season, and then the long term. This well, any type of water resource we can get in discussion and decisions in the long term, and also a redesign. I think Patrick had ideas about the redesign in the day, and this whole Audubon thing too. I thought was really wonderful because, as we all know, as you're playing golf, is the flora and fauna there is an amazing park-like area. So, but that's hundreds of thousands of dollars. Consultants, I don't know if you're familiar, go get a golf course designer and you're going to have to kick your checkbook over to him. So that's going to take a full effort from not only the city, the Parks Commission, but also the users. We all have to get together and try to, if we want to continue this, something's got to change. Yeah, water is really the issue. I don't know that it's a problem with staffing. This is a short-term staffing problem, and it does get revenue, and Patrick was doing an amazing job of raising the revenue to the point where we could actually say, hey, we're supporting an amazing 60, 70 acres of beautiful land for our community, and we don't have to, it's got some revenue potential. So, and then the priceless part of it is the people get to enjoy the golf there. And so that's the part that you build it and you maintain it, and they will show up. And I think we proved that. And, I've been getting emails about the condition of the course. I understand that everybody has their own level of what is acceptable and what isn't. And when we got away from a lot of the chemicals, it just makes it so much more difficult to maintain a golf course. But then the community decided that we needed to not use these chemicals. And so it's an ongoing battle between some of the community sees. I've talked to several people who see no value in the golf course. They think it's absurd. And I have never felt that way, and I will continue to not feel that way. And I will support, as long as I feel I'm getting support from the golf community, which I can see right here is really helpful for me. I'm going to lobby for trying to keep this thing going. And the short-term water issue next year, I was hoping for a big snow season this winter. That didn't materialize. And if it's worse next year, we're going to be back here talking about how we're actually going to make this thing survive. So, we're dependent on Mother Nature. And as we know, Southern Oregon, there's been lots of droughts in the 40 years I've lived in Southern Oregon. There's been every so many years, there's another drought. This seems to be particularly bad. So I just feel that there's been a lot of really excellent discussion, and I would agree with Jim. The motion seems a bit severe because it talks not about attempting to keep it open for the short term, but it does talk about some ultimate other use of it. And we're not the community development department. We're the Parks and Recreation Commission. This is an excellent part of our whole system. It's not something we want to give up. We want to maintain it, but it has to make fiscal sense. And we could have spent the next hour and a half discussing our budget problems and bore you with all that, but these are real problems, and it's just not the golf course. It's this community realizing how valuable the parks system is in our community, and showing themselves that they feel this is a really valuable asset. Every community has to have a police department. You have to have a fire department. A parks department, you don't necessarily have to have, as shocking as that is. And some communities have really poor parks departments, but systems. And I think in the 20 years I've been on the commission, the parks has blossomed into an incredible system. And like all systems, it's a pay-to-play service, and that's kind of where we're at. We probably subsidize everybody who golfs out there. The citizens of Ashland are probably throwing in a good 30 cents to help you guys golf because we think it's important to subsidize the course. And I know the ice rink, the senior center, the nature center, all those are really highly subsidized, but it's hard to say that these aren't really valuable to the community. And so there's a lot of decisions that are coming up in the future, but we really want support all along the way from the golf community about our budget, and that goes along with staffing, and it's not necessarily the water. The water is totally dependent on TID, and there's like Southern Oregon University completely depends on TID for their beautiful campus, and I'm wondering how they're going to survive this too. I haven't heard of that, but it's obviously pretty dire circumstances here in Southern Oregon, and we can't control the weather, but we can help control the short-term issue and let's get through this summer and move towards a long-term solutions. Seems like we have a lot of good ideas, and I think Brett has his hand up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just real quick, I let Jim's comment about the motion. Some of it, I think, and Jim too, we need to be careful about how that's worded exactly. Everybody in the business industry and governments, everybody has staffing issues. We have staffing issues at our trucking company. People don't want to work. Not sure exactly what they're doing for income, but a lot of people didn't come back to work after pandemic, and cost to hire people has gone up significantly at the reopening. So anyway, staffing is going to continue to be a problem for everybody. The water obviously is our main problem, I think, and then of course the financial resources that we have available to us to buy water or to build a well, and those kind of things. Those are the two main things that I see, and I think that we need to give the message that long term we want the golf course to exist, and that's what the golf course subcommittee should be recommending, is that, hey, our long-term solution is to figure out a way to maintain the golf course, not to consider other uses of the property. I mean, I know that people have talked for years about, we should turn it into housing. It's not worth being a golf course. But I think, like I said last time, we all need recreational opportunities. That's what, the golf course, the swimming pool, the ice skating rink, all of those things are recreational opportunities. Our bike paths, so we have a great many of in our area. It's all of that is just part of the enjoyment of living in a community. In our Lithia Park, I live right down across from North Mountain Park. Kids playing baseball, kids playing soccer. Take the grandkids over there to play in the park, in the equipment and stuff, and they love it. So it's all part of being a community in a city, and a valuable part, not just the golf course, but everything else. I mean, I think that, and one of the comments about the condition of the golf course, and Jim mentioned, the restrictions, I guess, on taking care of the weeds and stuff. My daughter happens to have her doctorate in weed science, not the kind of weed that you smoke, from UC Davis. And she told me a long time ago, Dad, you'll never be able to maintain a golf course without using herbicides to kill weeds. And so we have the parks, we have recreation. Maybe the recreational part of the golf course should not be under the same restrictions as far as maintaining the grass and stuff as we have in the park. So that's just a not for this discussion, but down the road, I don't know if that's even a possibility. But anyway, I enjoyed the conversation and ideas. I think that and we know we've got our Twilight League with 10 teams, and we're scheduled all the way through the end of August, and so our people are not planning to have the golf course shut down. So,
Michael, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so I'd encourage you guys to just make whatever motion you're comfortable with. I think I understand the issue with staffing, and I can appreciate that from the subcommittee's point of view, but I can also just say, like Brett, you said, staffing really is an issue. And, none of us have ever eaten at a restaurant that doesn't have any staff because they're not open. If we ever get to a point where we can't, which is unlikely, but we just want to let people know that staffing is an issue. And if we get cut so much that we can't afford to, we have to choose where our employees work, we might be having a discussion of what does close. But I agree. I don't disagree with you about taking it out. It's not something you need to worry about. The other thing I just want to say in closing is the golf course is open. It is open. It's running. It's functioning. And a lot of sometimes it's hard to hear a lot of the criticisms that are coming to us, because the golf course is open and people are fighting to keep it open because we have kept it open for a long period of time and have maintained it. And yeah, we do have weeds. We can't use herbicides, pesticides, but the golf course is open, and we would like to see it stay open. And we're looking forward to you guys making a motion that we can take to the Parks Commission to continue this discussion.
When's the meeting that this motion needs to be delivered by, I guess?
So the Parks Commission is going to be discussing at their study session next week on May 3rd, but no decisions would be made that night. It would be, I believe, coming back on May 11th. Is that correct, Michael? Yeah,
I mean, it's up to the commissioners when it comes back, but this is a timely issue. So May 11th is probably when it would come back. And any, Nancy and Brett, you're welcome to attend the meeting, and you would be able to speak to the commission as committee members. And we'd be happy to have you there to talk about your points of view and everything as committee members. Other folks would have to sign up for public comment, but we'd love to hear from anybody who wants to comment. And Rachel is right. No decision will be made next week. It's only discussion.
But
Michael, is this something that, Michael, Rachel, you guys can take the motion that you've got here and just maybe get a little bit? We're not obviously going to have time to get together and discuss it again, but. Well,
Jim, can I make a recommendation really quick? I think you could just say you can make a statement even and say the golf course subcommittee's number one priority is to ensure the long-term sustainability of the golf course. And in that vein, our motion is to recommend that the Ashland Parks and Recreation use whatever resources are available to keep the golf course open until, you don't have to say anything about closing if you don't want to. You could leave it right there. You could also include, and also that Ashland Parks and Recreation continue looking at scenarios to ensure the long-term sustainability, such as a well and drought tolerant, a redesign that would include drought tolerant plants, yada, yada, those types of things. So something along those lines. I think you could come up with a motion today. If you're not comfortable though, don't let me force you into it. We could meet again, but we'd have to meet again soon to talk about it.
Yeah, we really want to make a motion today because that would be the most efficient way. They would have our minutes for our meeting and also our motion. And so it's usually not the chair that makes the motion. So it's kind of up to one of you two to just get the gist of what we've discussed today and We'll vote on it.
Gosh, Michael, what you just said a minute ago seemed to make a lot of sense to me. I mean, I think that our recommendation obviously should be to figure out ways to keep the golf course open long term and not really go into the possibilities of closure, but look at ways to mitigate future droughts, through other alternatives. And that's what we're really trying to do, is trying to figure out a way to get through this summer and then figure out how to keep it open long term. We're coming up on a 100-year anniversary, and I certainly don't want to be the one that's sitting there as we close the golf course permanently, because
I think that was a motion. I feel like
part of that. Yeah.
Well, I was only paraphrasing what I had heard from you. If you agree, you could use words, some of the words I used, or modify it, or whatever you want, but somebody needs to make a motion. But I was just trying to phrase what I heard from you guys.
I guess I would move that we draft what Michael was just saying into an official motion, saying that the golf course subcommittee is looking to maintain the golf course long term, and in the short term, find ways to going, and long term look at alternative solutions for future droughts.
Great. Excellent motion. Do we have a second?
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. And Sean, was that enough to draft a motion out of for you?
Yeah, I think I have it. I'll have to go back and listen to the audio, but the last thing that Brett said seemed good. So.
Okay, if that works for you, and we've moved and seconded, hey, all those in favor, raise your right hand. All right, anything else today?
I'm going to sign off. Take care, everybody.
Bye, Michael.
Alrighty. Hey, just thanks everybody for your input, and let's hope for the best.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for coming.
Bye.